Can we cut behind the mystery? I will meet you by the witness tree. Lay your heart on the line. This time I'm gonna come when you call. I get to you if I have to crawl. 'Cause he can't hold me in these iron walls. Now we got mountains to climb. This time, who else is gonna bring you a broken arrow? Who else is gonna bring you a bottle of rain? There it goes. Moving out across the water. Well, there it goes. Turning my whole world around. 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 Turning my whole world around.
Goodness, my goodness, my goodness. So wonderful. I know that I don't need to introduce Dahlan to you, but if you are here for the first time, Dahlan Richenberg is a practitioner, and he's also a ministerial student. Along with me, we get to play in class together. And if you watched last week or you tuned in, Dahlan introduced me in a way that made me cry. And I hope not to do that to Dahlan, but I did think to myself, okay, when I think of Dahlan, what do I think of? The first word that came to me was thoughtful. Now, I don't mean like, oh, that was a thoughtful gesture. I mean thoughtful. Dahlan is the most thoughtful person. He is, as Ernest Holmes asked us all to be, open at the top. Dahlan is open at the top. He is always learning. He is always looking at what is before him and looking at all aspects of it. It is such a gift and such a pleasure to have him in my life and in our lives. Yeah. And so I know that whatever it is he has to say today, I know Linda said with that voice, he could read us the phone book and we would love it. But I know that he will not do that. So Dahlan.
Thanks. Thanks, you guys. Well, we don't always see ourselves the same way others see us sometimes, right? So, broken arrow, what does that mean, right? Broken arrow means I surrender. And what happens when you surrender? It'll turn your whole world around, right? Everything changes when we surrender. And so I think that's about, giving up the war. But it's not always obvious to me how surrendering, how giving up is actually strength. And that's what I want to talk about, how vulnerability is strength. I'm going to get a little bit into that this morning. And there's three aspects I want to talk about here. Vulnerability is surrender. Second, vulnerability is strength. And then the third aspect I want to get to is how vulnerability can allow us to transcend our fear, transform it into something else. And when that happens, it frees us, right? And that's what we're here for, isn't it? To get unbound, to unfold. Right. So last week, Susan pointed out that Google's definition of vulnerability is to be susceptible to physical or emotional attack and harm, right? And if that's really going on with any of you here at any time, don't do any of the stuff I'm about to talk about. Deal? Okay. This is not about going and making a martyr of yourself. But we do need a good definition for that. So I was looking around, and Richard Rohr has been talking about, he's been talking about this for a couple of months now. And his definition is vulnerability is uncovering what we hide. It's a simple action, right? It's uncovering what we hide. So back to the song. Can we cut behind the mystery? I'll meet you by the witness tree, right? We can be available for each other to uncover things that we want to. But let me tell you a secret. Everybody's got something to hide all the time. No matter how vulnerable we are, we do have something to hide. I was thinking about this as a weird kind of thought, and I didn't originally going to put it in this talk, but that was another thing that I'm going, go ahead and say it. Go ahead. So, okay. So if you're at like a giant soccer game or a college football game, there's like 80,000 people in the audience, right? Pretty good sample. If at halftime I was to ask everyone, have you ever been deceived? Raise your hand if you've ever been deceived, right? 100% of that audience would raise their hand, or they're deceiving you. Right? And if I ask the second question, who here has ever deceived anyone? Everyone's going to raise their hand, right? We're all in this together, right? This is something that it's a good thing to know that. When you're walking around in the world, it's a good thing to know that. So I think the point of that is that we're really good at deceiving ourselves. And that's one of the reasons that we need to talk about this and practice this, right? So I'm going to start at the beginning. The first step in the 12-step program is I am powerless over alcohol or whatever the addiction might be, and my life has become unmanageable. Has anyone here ever struggled with addiction or anything like that? Yeah. So here's the common factor, and I don't want to speak for everyone, but it's something that I've noticed, is that what becomes untenable in that journey of addiction is that you are constantly in the process of lying. Constantly have to lie to do and uphold what the facade is, but also to keep doing what you really don't want to do. So it's not so straightforward, but the first step is actually surrendering and saying, this is something I need to change, right? And we all have that. So once again, we do lie to everyone else, but what really needs to change is we have to stop lying to ourselves, and that's what this helps us do. Right? They can't hold me in these iron walls. We've got mountains to climb. We have better things to do, don't we? So, and this is the ultimate surrender. I give up the part of me that wants to have power over life, and I surrender to a higher power, the power that is life itself. Right? So I'm a construction guy. I work in a construction world. I like sports. And so this may be a weird analogy for this room, but I want to introduce you guys to a guy named Jay Glazer. And he is an unsuspecting character, like I say, for this crowd. But if you were at a sports bar or if you watched the Super Bowl or any of these kinds of things, you'd know exactly who he is. He's a crazy guy that is a color guy for a sports announcer. He's been a sports reporter. He has a whole network of gymnasiums where they train. He trains pro athletes in the off season for ultimate fighting and mixed martial arts. Big weightlifter. These guys are meatheads, right? And he is in this world of high paid, high power people. And here's the thing about Jay. Elizabeth brought this up a few weeks ago. These very influential, known people who come out and say, these are my struggles. This man, since he was 6 years old, has been struggling with, he calls them his roommates, his inner demons. And every day he wakes up and spends the first couple of hours of his life trying to fight through them to get out the door. He talks about living in the gray. He still, to this day, has weekly panic attacks. And I bring this guy up because he is the first person that I heard say vulnerability is strength. Right? There's a lot more to his story. He has been bringing pro athletes and veterans with PTSD together. And yeah, they work out at the gym, but they huddle up and they talk to each other. He tells a story about a woman who came to their Wednesday night free thing. She came for 2 years before she ever said a word in the huddle up, right? And he calls his team. Everybody that's in his world is on his team. She's now like a CFO of his business, right? So this stuff is amazing and powerful. I just want to say that. But here's what he says: being a strong person means you're willing to be vulnerable and ask for help when it's needed. Too many people hold in their feelings because they don't want to appear weak. And one of the things he shares all the time is that everyone that he has opened up to, he's closer with, right? So back to the imagery in that song. I want to breathe when you breathe, right? I want to breathe when you breathe. Ultimate connection. And that's the strength of being vulnerable, isn't it? When we're able to be vulnerable and share that moment, that's real connection. So we have surrender. My life has become unmanageable. I want to stop hiding from myself. And we have vulnerability as strength, right? Overcoming fear. So now I want to get to transforming that fear. Are any of you guys familiar with Michael Singer? He wrote a book called The Untethered Soul. He wrote another book called The Surrender Experiment. And so it's the story of his life, which is kind of interesting. When he was in college, he somehow became aware that he had these voices in his head all the time. Talk, 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 always going. Can any of you relate to this? Like when you said Dahlan is thoughtful, I'm like, yeah, way too thoughtful, full of that stuff all the time. And so, but what Michael did is he realized that he could actually watch that character and those characters and have a little and actually go, well, if that's there and I'm here and I can watch that, I'm not that, or I'm not exactly that, right? So he wound up looking for where he could do this, and he found meditation. He started meditating and looking at Hinduism and Buddhism. And before very long, and this is pretty unusual, before very long, it may have been a year or two into this, he had like a full-blown white light awakening experience. He was out in the woods, he meditated for a while, and he decided he was going to do what Buddha did. I'm going to sit under this tree and he had that experience, right? And so he came back into his normal world and it started to fade away. And so he regimented his life to practicing yoga, meditation, fasting, all this stuff. He couldn't get back, couldn't do it, right? And he tried and he tried. And this guy was a real brainiac. I mean, he, he was in a master's program, but because he was so smart, they kind of let him do his own thing and live out in the woods and do his thing. But he ended up getting his master's in finance. He ended up running this multi-gazillionaire corporation doing computer software. And they were the first ones to do computer software for the medical industry, which, if you can imagine, it was pretty big. In any event, what he realized in trying to get back to that awakening, right, was that he had to, regular life had to be his practice, right? He had to just go through life and do whatever was put in front of him. So here's what his new motto was: from now on, I will do whatever is put in front of me with all my heart and without regard for personal results. I'll do this work as though it was given to me by the universe itself, because it was. And that's what the book is about, is everything that happened when he surrendered to life. So that's what transforms fear, right? Vulnerability and surrender are really the means for allowing life itself, your life, to set you free. And yes, we can do it like Michael Singer. Good luck. But we can also use some simple practices like Susan suggested last week, right? Are we initializing vulnerability? Are we making ourselves vulnerable in the appropriate places? Another question might be, are we recognizing when someone else is being vulnerable and then returning the favor? Are we paying attention? Because that's a doorway, isn't it? That's a doorway for us. Another question that came to mind was, how do we disguise what we hide? If we can become a little more familiar with that, I think that can be helpful. And how do others disguise what they hide? Who else is going to bring you a broken arrow? It's got to start with you, right? It's got to start with me. There it goes. We'll turn our whole world around, and it will. So I want to invite the band back up. But I also want you to participate in this. We're gonna do a little meditation, if that's okay. I hope you guys are comfortable with that. And I'm going to incorporate some words from a poem by David White, just because it's pretty beautiful. So just settle back into your chair. Try to relax. Forget about the fact that there's a whole bunch of us here, all with something to hide. But that's okay, because we're all here. And if you're standing, participate in this too. And now just gaze into your visual field with your eyes closed. Keep your vision very wide. Just feel that expansiveness. Gaze into the sky of your mind, a horizon further than you can see. Here, we must learn one thing: You must learn just one thing. The world was made to be free in. Yes, the world was made to be free in. Give up all other worlds except the one to which you belong. You belong in this world, right here and right now. And I just let that be so, and so it is.